Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we will start yet another chapter of forensic toxicology. Today's topic we will start with the heavy metals. In first part we will discuss arsenic and lead, and in the next session we will discuss copper and mercury. So arsenic, lead, copper, mercury, these are the heavy metals which will fall under the inorganic irritants. However, arsenic is not a metal, it's a metalloid, but the poison in signs and symptoms, the mechanism, they all resemble with the all other heavy metal. That's why it is grouped with them, predominantly due to similarity in the mechanism of action. So the mechanism of action, as we have discussed in our first class in the general toxicology, the mechanism of action is binding with the sulfhydryl group of an enzyme. So this is the predominant mechanism of action for all these four heavy metals. At the end of today's class, I will expect that you guys should be able to enumerate the signs and symptoms of arsenic lead poisoning, both acute and chronic, their management and their respective medical legal importance. So first I will start with arsenic. white powder, lutein-like talcum powder. So this is arsenic trioxide. Arsenic trioxide or white arsenic. In your examination, you can be given this white powder for identification. Toxidodynetics, arsenic is absorbed through all porters, inhalation through arsenic vapor or arsine gas, including oral and also cutaneous route. It can be absorbed through intestine. After absorption, it is redistributed in liver, lungs, etc. and it is excreted via urine. However, it replaces phosphorus in the bone where it may remain for years. And arsenic is not biodegradable, so it can be detected in a cadaver even hundreds of years later. As I mentioned time and again, from the skeleton of Napoleon Bonaparte, we have isolated arsenic after more than 100 years of his death. So that concludes, that proves that arsenic has an unique criteria that makes it valuable to toxicologists. Arsenic is also deposited in the hair or any tissue where keratin is deposited, arsenic also deposited. So along with skin, in nails and hairs. Arsenic does not cross blood-brain barrier. However, it can cross placenta and can cause intrauterine death of the fetus. So this is the relevant part of toxicodynamics of arsenic. You must remember. First one, absorption through all portals including cutaneous route. Storage in bone as it replaces phosphorus, and in hair, nails where keratin is found. And it does not cross blood-brain barrier but crosses placenta easily. So this is the relevant points of arsenic's toxicodynamics. The mechanism of action is similar to all heavy metals. It binds with the sulfhydryl groups of mitochondrial enzymes, and that causes interference with their action. So mitochondrial enzymes become ineffective. So mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation, it becomes uncoupled. So this uncoupling of mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation is the main mechanism of action. Also, another mechanism is direct action of arsenic. It causes increased permeability of small blood vessels and direct inflammation and necrosis of intestinal mucosa. This is responsible for the acute toxicity. In acute toxicity, arsenic poisoning resembles cholera. It causes acute gastroenteritis with watery diarrhea. This is because of this mechanism: increased permeability of small blood vessels and inflammation and necrosis of the intestinal mucosa. This leads to a hemorrhagic gastroenteritis, fluid loss, and dehydration. And in case of chronic toxicity, this mechanism becomes important. Clinical features: acute poisoning. Initially, for all metal poisons, all heavy metals, in any acute poisoning, initial symptom is most likely there's a metallic taste in the mouth and the garlicky odor. This garlicky odor is found as arsenic. Along with arsenic, it can be found also in acute phosphorus poisoning. I have already mentioned. Also, this garlicky odor can be found in organophosphorus poisoning. Okay. Severe nausea, vomiting, colicky abdominal pain, and profuse diarrhea are characteristics of acute poisoning. That's why it resembles cholera. Initially, the stool contains fecal matter, then it becomes rice watery type, rice water stool, and eventually at the end it contains blood. That will be blood, a bloody diarrhea. Stools may contain certain stages of stomach mucous membrane. Intense thirst is a constant feature. The throat is parched, but drinking water accentuates the vomiting. For this is the GIT phase, then becomes the multi-organ failure. Collapse sets in due to the profuse fluid loss through the bloody diarrhea and vomiting. There's circulatory collapse with cold clammy skin, facial pallor, sunken eyes, rapid febrile pulse, and shine respiration. There can be convulsions and coma before death. However, the person is usually conscious until the end. The cause of death is usually, if it occurs in first 12 hours, usually due to shock. If not that, then it can be due to acute renal failure as a result of the acute hypovolemic shock or and fulminant hepatic failure, which develop over the next few days. For arsenic trioxide, fatal dose is in the range of 200 to 300 milligram. In large doses, the fatal period is 2 to 4 hours. However, in gastrointestinal form, the average fatal period is 12 to 48 hours. Subacute poisoning. Subacute poisoning is when arsenic is administered in small doses over a regular intervals to cause death by gradual prostration. Symptoms are usually dyspepsia, cough, tingling in the throat, followed by vomiting, purging with abdominal pain, tenesmus, bloody diarrhea, muscle cramps, etc. Tenesmus is a quality abdominal pain, mainly in the lower region, preceding act of defecation. So this due to bloody diarrhea, vomiting, and there's acute hypovolemic shock and this electrolytemia. This will lead to the muscle cramp. Here also some peripheral neuropathy is seen, neuritis and depression can be there. So this is a subacute poisoning which occurs over a period of weeks. If it occurs in a period of months, more than months at a stage, then it's a chronic poisoning. What are the source of chronic poisoning? Chronic poisoning is can mostly accidental in nature, as occupational hazard in case of smelting and refining of ores, manufacturing of weedicide, paints, dye, cosmetics, drugs, etc. As I said, Paris green or emerald green, the copper acetoarsenite is used as insecticide. Shields green or copper arsenite is used in paints and dyes. There can be cosmetics. Earlier, arsenic trioxide was used in many drugs. In case of indigenous drugs, arsenic can be there. So here, our chronic arsenic toxicity as an occupational hazard. Another source is of drinking water from a contaminated source. In various parts of India, in the groundwater, as the level of groundwater decreasing day by day, it is contaminated with arsenic. And drinking that water over a prolonged period of time leads to chronic arsenic poisoning. What are the symptoms? The symptoms are usually GIT symptoms or neuropathy, etc. So GIT symptoms, as it's a chronic poisoning, so it's associated, there will be a loss of appetite, loss of weight, malaise, increased salivation, quality pain on and off. Sometimes it will increase constipation or sometimes diarrhea with occasional vomiting. So you need to remember in a chronic poisoning, the signs and symptoms they occur over a period of months. So initially they will start as a mild nausea, vomiting, then that will increase. There can be occasional diarrhea and constipation. Gradually there will be loss of appetite, loss of weight, malaise, etc. Symptom. This is the most characteristic one. It begins with a persistent erythematous flush. Erythema means a region of the skin which is red in color. With then there's itching in that area. So the skin becomes thick. This is called hyperkeratotic. That means the keratin is deposited in increased amount. Hyperkeratosis. So increase in keratin, hyperkeratotic skin and desquamation. Then a patchy pigmentation of skin. is seen. This is known as raindrop pigmentation. The light raindrops on a dusty road. On a dusty road, when the rain starts, you can see the raindrops over the dusty road. Similar pigmentation is seen. Hyperkeratosis is most prominent on the distal parts of the body, that is palms and soles. A diffuse dischromation of palm and sole is also characteristic. Mees line. Mees lines are transverse white striae on the finger ends. Technically, these are called striated leukonychia. It is a characteristic sign in chronic arsenic poisoning. So, how does it look like? Chronic arsenic poisoning one, if you ever see a patient, you will never forget in your life. So this is hyperkeratosis. This is how hyperkeratosis looks like, and you can see here some smoothening is there because of the dischromation. So this hyperkeratosis is like this, and this is the raindrop pigmentation, and these white transverse striae are the Mees line. So these are the three characteristic dermatological signs of chronic arsenic poisoning. Blood, anemia and leukopenia are commonly seen. Anemia is usually normocytic, normochromic. Thrombocytopenia can be there. So there's a chance that we will have a pancytopenia. Peripheral neuropathy, sensory and motor neuropathy are seen. However, sensory symptoms they predominate. There is a characteristic numbness and tingling in a Stocking glove distribution. Stocking glove distribution means areas where a person wear glove or stockings. That means in the upper limb, the distal half of forearm with both hands, and in the lower limbs also from the distal half of the leg below knee, including the soles. In those areas, there's a numbness and tingling. Distal weakness is our predominant feature. However, as I said, motor symptoms they come late and also rare. Respiratory muscle involvement may also occur in very late in the disease, which often contributes to the cause of death. So how to diagnose arsenic poisoning? Acute arsenic poisoning, arsenic is radio opaque. So if you can X-ray the person in a standing position, so in the stomach itself, you can find the radio opaque metal. Serum arsenic level, if it exceeds 7 microgram per dl, that diagnoses acute arsenic poisoning. Urinary arsenic in the 24-hour specimen can also be measured. But however, this is important. 48 hours abstinence from seafood ingestion is a mandatory requirement, as seafood contains higher than normal amounts of arsenic. And however, this is a less sensitive indicator, so often not done. These two are sufficient to diagnose acute arsenic poisoning. However, the main method of diagnosis is clinical. You have to diagnose it by the signs and symptoms. These only have confirmatory value. Arsenic may be detected in the hair and nails for a prolonged period after exposure. The management of acute arsenic poisoning. Supportive measure, there are rice water is diarrhea, fluid loss, vomiting. So you have to give intravenous fluids. You have to monitor the heart so that cardiac failure doesn't occur. Decontamination, gastric lavage may be driven with warm water, as warm water arsenic is soluble, so the arsenic will dissolve in the warm water and that will come out with the satin. However, then freshly precipitated hydrated ferric oxide may be administered, uh, so that this ferric oxide will combine with the arsenate to form ferric arsenite, which is non-toxic. Chelation therapy is the mainstay of treatment. British anti-leucide, which is also known as dimercaprol, is a chelating agent of choice. It is oil-based formulation to always given by a deep intramuscular injection. However, now DMSA or Saximar or DMPS, they are also available. They are more effective in reducing the arsenic concentration in the tissues. So in case of chronic arsenic poisoning, these are more effective nowadays. Hemodialysis or exchange transfusion can be tried in a serious cases to remove already absorbed arsenic from blood. The autopsy features in case of gastrointestinal ingestion, the mucosa is congested. It is described as red velvet mucosa to a frank hemorrhagic gastritis. Focal hemorrhage in the stomach wall, it gives rise to a flea-bitten appearance, like fleas have eaten bits of stomach mucosa. Subendocardial hemorrhage in heart is a characteristic feature. Fatty degeneration of heart, liver, kidney can be there. Fatty liver can be seen. Chronic arsenic poisoning, there can be features of non-specific inflammation in different organs like stomach, liver, etc. It's so how what to preserve. So apart from the routine viscera, that is, I will repeat again so that it you can remember it. Stomach with contained proximal 50 centimeter of duodenum, 500 grams of liver, half longitudinal section of each kidney. These are preserved in saturated solution of common salt, 30 ml of blood with fluoride oxalate preservative, 30 ml, 30 to 50 ml of urine with control samples of preservative. These are preserved. Along with it, there are some extra additional viscera preservation must be done. One is a piece of a long bone, most preferably femur, a bunch of pulled scalp hair, or the wedge of muscle, mainly from the back, and a small portion of skin for chemical analysis. In the skin, bone, and hair, arsenic can be detected, even if they are not found in the routine viscera. The meteorological aspects of arsenic poisoning. Arsenic is a odorless, tasteless. So earlier it was thought as an ideal homicidal poison, but it is actually not so because it's relatively insoluble and can be mixed with water or food with difficulty. So administration is difficult. Plus, it can be detected in the dead body long after death. Accidental cases of poisoning, through rare, sometimes occur from its admixture with drink and articles of food, etc. One of the most important sources of chronic arsenic poisoning in India is consumption of well water. A devastating health crisis known as endemic hydroarsenicism began to unfold in West Bengal in the early 1980s due to exposure to arsenic-laced well water. Uh, it was seen that more than 2 lakh tube wells have higher than normal arsenic content. The WHO permissible limit is 0.01 mg per liter. Okay, so this is the permissible limit, or 1 parts per billion. Okay, so this is arsenic. Now we'll move on to lead. Lead is one of the most common metals used. Elemental lead is not non-toxic, that it is not absorbed apart from vapor. So what are the different compounds of lead that are encountered and which are toxic? First one is lead acetate, or known as sugar of lead. It was used in medicine. Lead carbonate or white lead, manufacture of paints. This is the most commonly used lead tetroxide or red lead. It is used at vermilion as sindoor in Indian married women, Hindu married women, mostly in the North India. Lead sulfide or surma, this is applied on the eyes mainly by the Muslim community men. Tetraethyl lead, this is an organic compound of lead which is used in petrol as an anti-knotting compound. What is the use of anti-knotting compound? Earlier, in colder climate, in countries where when the temperature drops near zero in winter, the fuel in the automobile, they often freeze, so car won't start, and after repeated attempts there have been explosions in the car. To prevent that, tetraethyl lead is added as an anti-knotting compound. This prevents the petrol from getting detonated. So anti-knotting compound as the lead. So this is a predominant source of environmental pollution. Elemental lead as a shiny gray metal, and this is the vermilion or sindoor, which is used red lead used in many North Indian Hindu married women. In in our state West Bengal, the women mainly use red sindoor, which is mercury sulfide, and this is the surma. Okay. So lead toxicity, what are the sources of exposure? Environmental exposure to lead in the general population comes from mainly the inhalation of contaminated air due to presence of lead in fuel or mainly factory exhaust. Domestic exposure from the house paint, ceramic ware, indigenous medicines, vermilion, and occupational. Lead causes occupational poisoning in painters. They use pens which have contain lead compounds, printers as the blots set in at the blots used in the printing machine, they can be made from lead. Plumbers, if the pipes they are made of lead. Potters, in terms of ceramic industry, if lead is used. Plastics, auto repair works, and battery manufacture, etc. So in this industry, lead is used, so their worker can be exposed to lead toxicity. Usual fatal dose is much more in terms of acute poisoning is 10 gram. So it is very rare acute poisoning because ingesting 10 gram of salt is too much. But however, for tetraethyl lead, it's 100 milligram per kg. Kinetics, lead is absorbed through all portals of entry. Occupational exposure mainly from inhalation as lead vapors or lead fumes, etc. Most other situations mode of entry is ingestion. Tetraethyl lead can be absorbed rapidly through intact skin. Red lead or vermilion, which is used on the scalp, there occurs another scenario. If in case of oily skin, if the lady uses coconut oil or any kind of oil in the hair, oil has a saturated fatty acid like oleic acid. Lead combines with oleic acid to form lead olate. Lead olate can be absorbed through intact skin. That's how chronic lead poisoning can occur from red lead when it is used as vermilion along with some hair oils. Following absorption, it is stored in the bones as lead phosphate and lead carbonate. In case of children, total body lead 70% is in the bone, whereas in case of adults is 95%. In case of hypermineralization of due to lead toxicity, it is reflect like this. If you do the X-ray of long bones, it's a child X-ray. As you can see, epiphysis is separated by the diaphysis. There's a gap. This thin gap is there due to as the centers are not being united. This whitish area is the due to hypermineralization due to chronic lead deposition. These are called lead lines. So lead lines, they are very important diagnostic feature for chronic lead poisoning. These are mainly children. Absorbed lead, which is not retained in the body, is excreted by urine or bile. Lead combines with the sulfidyl enzymes for any heavy metal, leading to interference with their action. But it mainly damages enzymes of the heme synthesis pathway. Which enzymes? Delta amino levulinic acid aldehyde, allosynthetase, coproporphyrinogen oxidase, and ferrochelatase. These four enzymes of heme pathway, they are mainly inactivated due to binding of lead with them. That causes anemia. And also it causes this defective heme to be deposited in the RBC cytoplasm, which is stained by basophilic dyes. So this is called as basophilic stippling. So this basophilic stippled appearance of RBC cytoplasm is due to deposition of the defective heme or heme breakdown products. Lead increases hemolysis, leading to release of immature red cells like reticulocytes and basophilic stipple cells. In CNS, lead causes cerebral edema and also axonal edema. So it also has a direct cytotoxic effect. And in the CVS, lead can cause hypertension, myocarditis, nephritis, etc. and also infertility, direct toxicity. So these are the different mechanism of action. So mainly you have to remember this, how it interferes with heme synthesis, that leads to anemia, and it also increases hemolysis, as these uh, RBCs which have defective hemoglobin or defective heme will be lysed by the reticuloendothelial cells in spleen, and so the immature red cells now will be released. So there will be reticulocytes and basophilic stipple cell in the peripheral blood smear. Also, it is directly toxic to different things, the different systems like CNS, CVS, kidney, and the reproductive system. Poison is very rare, as the toxicity is, as the fatal dose is much more, 10 gram. There's no way someone will eat 10 gram of salt, of lead salt, in any scenario. If it at all occurs, symptoms are include like the general arsenic poisoning or any other heavy metal toxicity, metallic taste, abdominal pain, constipation, diarrhea, vomiting, etc. However, this abdominal pain is also known as lead colic. Lead colic is a very intense pain. So the diarrhea, vomiting, that will lead to hypovolemic shock. There can be lethargy, ataxia, etc. Convulsions, coma, death. So main focus of today's discussion will be on the chronic lead toxicity, which is also known as plumbism, because earlier, as lead-based pipes were used, plumbers have lead toxicity more than other people. So it is known as plumbism. Also another name is saturnism. So the symptoms of lead toxicity, chronic lead toxicity, can be remembered in an alphabetical way. So first, A for anemia. Facial pallor is due to vasospasm, mostly due to contraction of the capillaries, mainly seen over the face, and this is often the earliest sign. Occurs the impairment of the synthesis of heme from the protoporphyrin, and also loss of intracellular potassium because of the increased permeability of the cell membrane, as some mitochondrial enzymes are also damaged. So it damages RBC in two ways. It it hinders heme synthesis, so defective heme is produced, and also it increases the cell permeability. So intracellular potassium goes out. So that RBC will break, will cause lysis. Now, the basophilic stippling of red cells is due to condensation of iron containing RNA near the mitochondria. These are stained. So these are the defective heme product. Heme will be broken down. That will liberate iron. That iron and its different compounds, some with the RNA, will cause the stippled appearance. In the gum, closer to gum, there's a black or blue line is seen, which is called Bartonian line or lead line. So this Bartonian line is the B of your symptoms. So B for Bartonian line. This is produced due to increases of poor oral hygiene. In the teeth, there are food particles stuck. That food particle is acted upon by the oral anaerobic flora, to produce hydrogen sulfide. That hydrogen sulfide will combine with lead to form lead sulfide. So this is lead sulfide is deposited like this to form Bartonian line. C for colic. Lead colic, it is often the first symptom which causes suspicion. Facial pallor is the first symptom. However, if you see a person with facial pallor, your first differential diagnosis will never be lead toxicity. It will be some iron deficiency or some hemolytic disorder, etc. However, this anemia, if it is combined with lead, with a quality abdominal pain and constipation, then it should increase your suspicion of lead toxicity. It generally affects all smooth muscles, so intestines, ureter, uterus, everywhere. It is spasmodic, intermittent, and relieved by pressure. Constipation is also seen. So, wrist drop or foot drop. This is due to peripheral nerve palsy. Less than 10% of patients they are affected. This is your wrist drop. E for encephalopathy. It is frequently encountered mainly in the children. This is due to inactivation of the monoamine oxidase, which is an enzyme, and this is also inactivated due to binding of the lead with the SH radical. That will cause mainly personality changes, mood swings, the child becomes highly irritable, restlessness, or mental and dullness. Blunting of ITU is an important feature in lead toxicity in case of children. In some cases, there may be acute conditions like convulsions, delirium, coma, etc. Lead osteopathy. Lead is deposited beyond the epiphysis on growing long bones like lead lines, as I said earlier. Effects on reproductive system, it causes infertility or sterility in both sexes. In male, there may be loss of libido. In female, there will be menorrhagia, or that is the menstrual irregularities. And in case of pregnant women, there will be abortions. So these are all the features of chronic lead toxicity. A for anemia, B for Bartonian line, C for lead quality abdominal pain and constipation, D for wrist drop and foot drop for due to lead palsy, E for lead encephalopathy. That can be an F as failure, multi-organ failure in case of a terminal condition. There can be acute renal failure, also lead osteopathy, and I for infertility. How to diagnose? The normal method to diagnose chronic lead toxicity is to measure the blood lead level. If it is more than 50 or 55 microgram in children or more than 60 in case of adult, it is indicated of chronic lead toxicity. Peripheral blood picture will show anemia with basophilic stipulin with immature red cells, light red reticulocytes. RBC can be fluorescent due to presence of the free erythrocyte protoporphyrin. As I said, enzymes of heme synthesis pathway are inactivated. So the steps where those enzymes were acting, those steps will be inhibited. So the precursor molecules will be deposited in extra amount. So mainly three types of compounds are extra deposited, and their mnemonic is ACP. A for ALA or alpha levulinic acid, C for proporphyrin, and P for protoporphyrin. These three compounds, they are deposited in extra amount in the RBC cytoplasm. So this free erythrocyte protoporphyrin can be measured, and also its gene compound, gene protoporphyrin, they can be measured. The increased amount indicates chronic lead toxicity. In urine, so urine, you can measure the lead in urine also. You can measure ALA in urine. or calcium sodium EDTA mobilization test. This is done first the patient is told to void the entire urine. It is discarded. Then EDTA is given. EDTA, what it does, it mobilizes lead from the body stores, from the bones or any other tissues into blood. After 24 hours, that lead will appear in the urine. So initial urine so from the first sample to the second sample, third sample, all are measured. If in gradually lead increases, that means there is a chronic lead toxicity. Lead was deposited in body tissues which is mobilized by EDTA. Also X-ray, you can detect the lead in stomach as it's radio opaque and also as lead line in the bones. Lead toxicity management is very important, so pay attention. In severe poisoning with encephalopathy, so severe acute poisoning or chronic lead toxicity with encephalopathy, the management starts with chelation. So the first chelating agent used is British anti-leucide. First, dip with as 4 milligram per kg immediately as deep intramuscular route because this is a oil-based formulation. So this will cross the blood-brain barrier and will bind with the lead present in the brain. As there's encephalopathy, that should be your main area of focus. Also with the other tissues. EDTA, as it's an aqueous solution, is tissue penetration is poor and it also doesn't cross blood-brain barrier. You should do a training a CT scan of brain to rule out cerebral edema. If there's cerebral edema, that should be managed accordingly, like controlled hyperventilation or by 20% mannitol. Mannitol is a diuretic which causes the cerebral edema to subside. This is the main treatment of cerebral edema. Or these glycerol or other loop diuretics can be tried. Corticosteroids are extremely beneficial unequivocally. For seizures, treat seizures with intravenous diazepam, fullness catheterization to monitor the urine. After going through all this, from the next second or third day, you should give EDTA by IV infusion. This EDTA will bind the lead from the blood, also from the bone. This bone penetration is poor for British anti-leucide. For that, you need EDTA. So if there's chronic if the late encephalopathy, start with British anti-leucide, then next day or day after that you add EDTA. Okay. Poisoning, start with EDTA. There's no encephalopathy, so you may or may not give British anti-leucide. Okay. Mild poisoning, you can try the oral chelation also, that is DMSA or Saxima. Other than this chelation, the supportive measures are thiamine in case of neuropathy. Acute poisoning, if there's radiopacity in the stomach, in the GI tract, if it is seen in the X-ray, then you can try gastric lavage by warm water. Lead cholit usually responds to IV calcium gluconate. So this is how lead toxicity needs to be managed. What are the meteorological aspects? Chronic lead poisoning is very important environmental health problem, mainly among the young children as they lead the lead-based paint from the toys or plasters or any or different chewable substances like toothpaste tube, etc. From that they can have lead toxicity. Infants may suffer from slow and progressive lead poisoning by imbibing the lead secreted in the breast milk by the mother, who is poisoned by lead by cosmetics or hair dyes. Suicidal and homicidal users are very rare. Workmen who contract disease during the course of employment or due to exposure to lead they can damage, they can claim compensation from their employer. Nowadays, lead pipes are not used. However, even now in India, drinking water is a source of lead poisoning because different parts of the water delivery system, the joints, etc., their lead is used. In Western countries, lead is banned from all kinds of paints, chemicals, its pipes, etc. But in India, the regulation came much late, and the permissible limit is much higher than the Western countries. And number three, as in many other laws in India, there's no surveillance. So many a times a lead is cheaper than many other metal. It is often used in the water supply system. Rare form of chronic poisoning can occur in case of souvenir bullet. Souvenir bullet is bullets which are left in the human body as it is more difficult to extract and it is not causing any symptom. That is called souvenir bullet. From that souvenir bullet, there's a theoretical possibility that chronic lead toxicity can occur. Lead can be used criminally as an abortifacient, as in the criminal abortion chapter we have seen that in the abortion state, lead salts can be applied to cause abortion, and also they can be used for cattle poisoning. So these are the meteorological aspects. Suicidal and homicidal uses are very rare. All poisonings are accidental, main accidental. Occupational hazards in different industries like painters, printers, plumbers, potters, plastic industry, auto repair shops, battery manufacturer, etc. In those industries, the person who are exposed to the lead, they can have lead toxicity, so they can claim damages from their employer. Chronic lead toxicity can occur from drinking water, it can occur from souvenir bullet, and also it can occur from lead-based paint in case of infant, in case of children. In case of infant, it can be transmitted by breast milk from mother who is undergoing chronic lead toxicity due to cosmetics and hair dyes containing lead. And lead can be used as abortifacient and cattle poison. So these are all the medical little importances of lead toxicity. So in the exam, the question can come in the practical exam mostly will be given, you guys will be given a specimen of a poison. You need to identify what is it, what is the active principle, is fatal dose, the sign symptoms and its medical importance. That is what you guys have to write in the practical exam itself. In the theory, chronic lead poisoning, its sign symptoms, management, sources of exposure, and medical aspects are important question. And chronic arsenic poisoning is also very much important. So please go through this chapter slowly and carefully. It's an important chapter. Feel free to reach to me at any point of time. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.